Alright, we're going to start first by finding the hip flexion. Alright, you got to find this graded trochanter. Alright, now bring your knee up to your chest as far as you can. And we got about 81 degrees of hip flexion. So now I'm going to do it on the other side. Oh, yeah, you can just turn around. Yeah, that's correct. Find the graded trochanter again. Alright, and then bring your knee up to your chest. On this side, he has a little more hip flexion. We got about 92 degrees on this side compared to 82 on the other side. Right. Now we're going to do hip extension. So find the graded trochanter again. Put the axis on it. All right. Lift your leg up as high as you can. Right there, said we had about 10 degrees of hip extension. So now we're going to do the other side. Alright, find the graded trochanter again. Alright, lift your leg up as high as you can. This one also says we have about 10 degrees of hip extension. Now we're going to measure internal rotation of the knee. Alright, now bring your knee as far as you can. And you see that he has about 30 degrees of internal rotation of his knee. Now we're going to do external. Bring it out as far as you can. And we also see right here we have about 31 degrees of external rotation of the knee, of the hip. Now we're going to go to this side. Internal rotation of the hip on this side. Bring your knee in as far as you can. Okay, we have about, had the tool upside down, but we have about 27 degrees of internal rotation on this side. And that external, take it out as far as you can. We have about 37 degrees of external rotation on this side of the. Now we're measuring hip abduction. Alright, so put this up here. Hold it. Alright, now let me bring your leg. Let me make sure this line up on 0. Bring your leg up as far as I can. You still flat on the table? Alright, so it looks like that's about as far as you can go. This actually says about 19 degrees of hip abduction on this side. I'm going to go to the other side. Now, move your leg. Move your leg up. This one says about, also about 10 degrees of hip abduction on this side. Now we're doing hip adduction. Find the ASIs. Make sure this is lined up. Hold the front. There you go. I'm going to just bring this leg in as far as it can go. Alright. On this side, we have about, I want to say, 27 degrees of hip adduction. Go to this other side. Hold that for me. Bring it back open. Alright. And on this side, turn this around. We have about, looks like about 12 degrees of hip adduction. Now we're doing knee extension. Line this up with the femoral epicondyle. Make sure that the stationary line is lined up with the greater trochanter. Try to extend for me. We would expect 0, but got about -4 degrees of knee extension on this side. Alright, now go into flexion for me. This side we have about 131 degrees of knee flexion. Go to the other side. Make sure this is lined up. Alright, try to go an extension. And over here we have about -5 degrees of knee extension. Go into flexion for me. This side we have about 131 degrees also of knee flexion. Now we're gonna do ankle plantar flexion. So, alright, now bring your foot down as far as you can. This side has about 30 degrees of ankle plantar flexion. Now I'm going to line it back up, get your foot in a neutral position. Then go into dorsiflexion. We have about 15 degrees of ankle dorsiflexion. Go to the next side. Can you see me? Get your foot in neutral position. Go into plantar flexion. This side we have about 26 degrees of plantar flexion. Now, put this back in neutral. Foot's back in the neutral position. Now go into dorsiflexion. Got it back. Say that we have about 35 degrees of dorsiflexion on this one. Now we're going to do the dermatomes of the lower body. So we have L1, it's the lateral side of the hip and the groin. We have L2, it's the anterior medial side of the thigh. L3 is the medial aspect of the knee. Then we have L4, the lateral aspect of the lower, the medial aspect of the lower leg is L4. L5, top surface of the foot. And then we have L1, the lateral surface of the lower leg. Turn around for me. And then S2 is the posterior medial side of the thigh. Start. Now we're going to do the lower body myotones. And also with this, we're going to incorporate the manual muscle testing because it goes along with the myotones. So first we're going to do the L3 myotone, which is the knee extension. So, resist me. Alright. I'm going to grade this as a 5 because it was pretty normal. There was no trouble with the resistance. And then we're going to go on the other side. This is the L3 myotone and also the manual muscle testing to go along with it. So try to resist me. Alright, and I'm also going to grade that a 5 because that was like a normal reaction. Go. And I'm also doing the L4 myotone, which is ankle dorsiflexion, and I'm going to incorporate the manual muscle test with that one. So, alright. That was a pretty normal, it was pretty strong, so I'm going to go ahead and grade that a 5. I'm going to do the L4 dorsiflexion myotone on this side also with the manual muscle test. So, get in the dorsiflexion, resist. That was pretty strong, so I'm also going to grade that one a 5 too. Alright. Now I'm going to do the L5 manual muscle test, which is the great toe extension. I'm going to incorporate the manual muscle test with it. And the myotone is great toe extension. So go ahead and get your deflection. So I'm going to push down, you resist me. I'm going to grade this about a 4 or plus. It was pretty good resistance, but it wasn't as strong as other body parts, but it still had good resistance to it. I'm going to do the L5 myotone with the manual muscle test on this side also. Great toe extension. I'm going to get your foot in. I'm going to push down. He's going to resist. I'm also going to grade that one about a 4 plus 2. Now I'm doing the S1 myotone, which is the ankle eversion, before we're going to do plantar flexion for the manual muscle test. So, wait a minute. Push down for me. That's about a 5. Some good resistance. I didn't notice any weaknesses or anything. Do the same thing on this side. Plantar flexion. We're testing the S1 myotone with the manual muscle test. Push down for me. I'll give that about a 4 plus because that one was a little weaker than this side. Now I'm doing the S2 myotone, which is knee flexion. And with that, I'm going to incorporate the manual muscle test. So bring your knee up into flexion. Stop at 90 degrees. We're going to stabilize this. I'm going to push down on it, but you try to resist me. I grade that about a 4 plus. It was strong, but probably could have been a little bit stronger. We're going to go to this side, so go around here so you can see me a little bit. Bring your knee into flexion, about 90 degrees. You push down and you try to resist me. But yeah, I'm going to give that one a 5 because that one was a little stronger than the other side. You ready? Now I'm doing the L1 and L2 myotone, which is hip flexion, and I'm going to incorporate the manual muscle test with that. So I'm going to stabilize him right here by his iliac crest. Push down on the anterior medial side of the thigh. I want you to try to push up, but I'm going to be resisting. Go ahead. Grade that about a 5. It seemed pretty normal. I didn't feel any weaknesses. Going against gravity. Now on this side, we're going to do the same thing, the same manual muscle test. Over here. So, stabilize the iliac crest. Push down on the thigh and try to lift up. Give that one a 5 too. I didn't really see any weaknesses.